one layer which is highly educated and the other which isn't. So how do you bridge this gap and ensure the SOPs are maintained? And there is a, as he rightly said, Mr. Raghavan said, there's a pre-construction, there's a construction phase, and there's a post-construction. Now, the handover between these phases is poor, and therefore, those who are in the adjacencies of this industries, for example, plumbers, electricians, will maintain systems post STPs that have to be maintained. I think there are huge gaps in the entire system. So the key is reskilling and upskilling is no more a buzzword, but it is a necessity.
So just in the best interest of time, we can begin as members keep joining in. So very happy to see the fraternity here, and thank you everyone for taking the time out and joining in today. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience that they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us. We've received 100+ registrations, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and repeat visitors to our webinars, which is very encouraging and motivates us to provide high levels of dialogue through the online channels as well. For those of you who are new with us today, the BlueCircle is an exclusive community and ecosystem which is curated for business leaders currently across 6 sectors, which are real estate, e-mobility, energy, healthcare, aerospace and defense, and logistics. And very soon, we're adding 14 new sector communities to our platform to form the BlueCircle 20. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. And in response to the COVID challenge, the BlueCircle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series and our digital publication. And in addition to this, and you'll be happy to know that we very recently launched the first version of the BlueCircle app, which is curated for senior leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, ways to have meaningful conversations, connect with like-minded leaders, house high-quality curated content, and provide access to business opportunities across our core sectors. For those leaders who are interested among you, please do join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section and soon send out invitations post the webinar as well. And today, as part of our Skilling India series, we're privileged to have big minds and leading thinkers of the industry join in for our real estate community's discussion. The topic is skilling and upskilling pre and post construction workers. In the best interest of time, I will just briefly mention the names and designations of the panelists who've joined us here today. We have with us Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan, Executive Chairperson, LabourNet, Mr. Anil Sawhney, Director of the Infrastructure Sector, RICS, Mr. R. Narayanan, Office Managing Partner and National Lead for Education and Skill Development Sector, KPMG, Kolkata. And the chair and moderator for the session is Mr. G. Raghavan, Founding Partner, Next Practice Growth Partners, former CEO, Bharti Urban, NIT, Ingram Micro, Carrier, Independent Director with Amritanjan Healthcare, and also Director and Lead Angel Investor with BlueCircle. Thank you very much, sirs and ma'am. It's an absolute pleasure. And I now request Mr. Raghavan to please chair and moderate the session, sir.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you very much. At the very outset, thank you very much for the distinguished panelists, Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan, Mr. Anil Sawhney, Mr. Narayan. Thank you very much for sparing the time. It's a participation of leading thinkers and practitioners like you that any kind of a conversation gain its weight in gold. So thank you very much for sparing the time. Now, today's topic is about reskilling and upskilling for the real estate construction workers in the pre-construction as well as the post-construction spaces of the built environment. So it is needless to say that the real estate industry contributes about 11% of the GDP and adds about 4 million people in the labor workforce every year approximately. There's a lot of dynamics in the industry at the moment in terms of technology upgradation, automations, new methods of construction, new materials being used in the construction as well. All these needs to the need for skilling. However, often training is construed as a very easy solution for skilling when it is disconnected from the outcomes. We are in an environment where a lot of training is going on. It's questionable whether all of them are leading to real skilling on the ground. What can be done? What is being done? Are questions that is naturally on our minds. And I bet you that by the day this webinar ends, you would have heard from the leading experts and you will carry back some answers to these questions. There are many models of training that are happening, whether it's an integrated training model or user-driven training models. You will get to hear from the experts various state-of-the-art happenings across the world. So without much ado, I would like to request Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan to give her opening remarks. But before I do that, I want to introduce you Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan. She was cited as one of the top 50 women in business by Business Today, a leading magazine in India in the year 2017, an Entrepreneur of the Year in Social Business category by Forbes India in 2018. She's been a TED speaker several times. She's done her BA in Economics Honors, Delhi University, Masters in Social Work, University of Mumbai, and Doctorate in Development Studies, Institute of Social Economic Change, with 30 publications in the areas of labor and employment and gender issues to her credit. Between 1999 and 2007, Gayathri worked for the International Labour Organization, a United Nations agency. She co-founded LabourNet in 2006 with a vision to enable livelihoods and enhance quality of life through education, employability, and entrepreneurship. LabourNet has impacted about 1 million lives, empowering youth, men, and women to earn a decent living or become profitable micro-entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gayathri has dedicated her entire life dealing precisely with the issue that we've all gathered to hear about. Over to you, Dr. Gayathri.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to everybody at the BlueCircle. This topic has been very, very dear to my heart, and I will explain why. If you look at the statistics that Mr. Raghavan just gave us, it is a major employer. Undoubtedly, the real estate sector is a major employer. And if you look at construction as such, it's a major employer too. So if you divide the construction sector, you have the infrastructure sector, you have the real estate sector, which is both the corporate as well as the housing building. And then you have the individual plot sector and then the poor housing sector, between all of these, other than agriculture, it is the major employer. But it is an employer wherein not one person is known as an employee. In all others, you would say there is an employer-employee relationship. This is a multifaceted, subcontracted relationship that exists all over the world, not only India. So what makes India unique in our treatment of the sector? I think that's where there is a difference. So you have the much wanted engineers, architects who are highly skilled, who are in the sector, and you have the unskilled. This is probably the sector which has the maximum number of what they call unskilled, semi-skilled workers. In today's world, even the real estate sector has transformed. The last 20 years have seen huge transformation there. If you look at, actually, let me go to 30 years. In the 1990s, you would not have found so many high-rise buildings. Today, high-rise buildings, gated communities are the norm. They're not the exception. Office blocks have come in with 2-level, 3-level car parks. The height of the buildings have gone up. Obviously, which means that there is a whole lot of skilling required there. Now, if there is no first-time skilling happening in the sector, for all those who are at the bottom of the pyramid or the frontline workers. For the purpose of this discussion, I'll call this frontline workers. So in that case, there is a need for continuous skilling. But then the question arises, who's interested? Is it the worker? Is it the, if there is no single employer and there is a subcontracted system, is it the immediate employer stroke contractor, or is it somebody down the up the line? I think these are the questions which remain unanswered. And to add to the complexity is that those who have entered this system in the frontline worker section are those who feel they shouldn't be anyway educated. They feel they are dropouts out of the education system, that they weren't able to study and therefore they are in the system. So for them to be enthused to study is your second big question that we have. And the third is that you have one layer which is highly educated and the other which isn't. So how do you bridge this gap and ensure the SOPs are maintained? And there is a, as he rightly said, Mr. Raghavan said, there's a pre-construction, there's a construction phase, and there's a post-construction. Now the handover between these phases is poor, and therefore those who are in the adjacencies of these industries, for example, plumbers, electricians, will maintain systems post, STPs that have to be maintained. I think there are huge gaps in the entire system. So the key is reskilling and upskilling is no more a buzzword, but it is a necessity. The second point I'd like to make is, if it is a necessity, one needs to understand how are we going to deliver it, and who's responsible for the delivery of it is the second question. And the last is, with the next 2 decades where there will be enormous technology adoption happening in the real estate sector, what does it mean for the workers and the frontline, especially at the frontline workers? And what does it mean for the interaction between academia, the construction companies, builders and developers, and the frontline workers? So let me just stop here and hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I love the definition of frontline workers. I love the way that you have beautifully given respectability that they absolutely deserve, rather than calling us labor workforce, calling them as frontline workers. That itself is vastly reflective of your work in the area and your regard and really want to do something in this area. Thank you very much, Dr. Gayathri. We'll be coming back to you with many questions and pointers. Thanks for the opening remarks. So let me move to Mr. Anil Sawhney for his opening remarks. He's the Director of the Infrastructure Sector, RICS. Anil Sawhney is the Global Lead Construction and Infrastructure Sector for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. He's involved in producing the construction and infrastructure sector's body of knowledge, standards, guidance, practice statements, education, and training. He's also an adjunct faculty at Columbia University, visiting professor at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK, and an adjunct faculty at the University of Southern California. Anil has a rich mix of academic, research, industry, and consulting experience gathered in the US, India, Canada, the UK, and Australia. In 2020, he co-authored a book entitled Construction 4.0, Innovation Platform for the Built Environment. He is currently the co-editor of the Construction Innovation Journal. Dr. Sawhney serves on the International Editorial Board of the ICE Infrastructure Asset Management Journal and the Journal of Information Technology in Construction. Dr. Anil, thank you so much for joining. I think you are at the cross-section of the best of academia, best of India, and best of the world on this industry. Thank you for joining us. Over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Raghavan, and thank you for those kind words. Siddharth, I think you're doing an excellent job bringing all the experts together and talk about these timely topics. So let me just begin by making a few points that are very dear to my heart. I think construction, first of all, is a people business. Somebody said you can build a computer, you can build a building without a computer, meaning we're pretty archaic in sometimes the way we work, but you can't build a semiconductor chip without a building. You can't manufacture a car without a factory. So our sector actually is very nicely intertwined into a number of economic activities, living spaces, working spaces, and so on. Just to put in context, the employment by our sector in India is greater than the combined population of Australia and Canada, two countries where I happen to live and work. So the volume and the size of the sector is huge. But paradoxically, though, we still use many entrenched methods, many inefficient processes, and probably do not provide enough attention to people who are involved in every aspect of the sector. So as Dr. Gayathri mentioned, from conception, pre-construction, construction to post-construction. So hardly we are able to give a whole of life worldview to our sector, especially from a training and employment point of view. So I think it's very crucial for us to understand, first of all, the importance of learning and development in our sector. One way to look at it is because of not paying the attention it deserves, sometimes it hinders innovation in our sector. I'll give you an example. Here in the US, where I'm currently living, the exterior wall of a building, including housing, is constructed the same way as it was constructed probably a century ago, essentially using timber, using techniques that are demonstrably scientifically not superior, have many issues and defects and deficiencies. But we don't change that to a superior technology that is available to us, because if we do that, then we have to retrain our workers. Retrain workers in various disciplines such as carpentry, perhaps electrical, plumbing, mechanical, and other trades. So it hinders innovation, it hinders improvement in our construction means and methods, because we cannot pay full attention to learning and development. So I feel training, learning and development, skilling, upskilling, all these issues are central to the business of construction. So there needs to be much more attention given to this aspect. If you look at the sector itself from a people point of view, it's a pyramid. So the base of the pyramid is largely populated by unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled workforce. In the middle layer, probably you have supervisory and site operations based folks. And at the top of that pyramid are core professionals who could be designers, project managers, financial managers, legal experts, real estate experts, and other kinds of businesses and expertise that is required. These layers, and I think Dr. Vasudevan really pointed out very well, are all interconnected. You can't deal with them separately. If you deal with them in a fragmented fashion, there's not going to be improvement in productivity. They will be very difficult to move the industry as a whole forward. So if you look at that pyramid, there needs to be a pipeline. There needs to be involvement of the government, large players, academia, and other experts who work primarily in the area of workforce development. So I think that's a very important aspect that I consider needs to be dealt with in a holistic fashion when we talk about our sector. Lastly, I think the most important piece for me personally that I'm passionate about is technology. Both production or physical technologies and digital technologies. Our industry probably is a laggard when it comes to adoption of technology for obvious reasons, as I explained. Sometimes it's because of our entrenched methods and processes, but I think time has come that we cannot continue with the sticks and bricks approach. There needs to be industrialized construction. We need to think more holistically about business enablers and process enablers and technology enablers that'll move us in that direction. That'll have a direct impact on training. How do we make folks who are at the work phase into situations that are less dangerous, less difficult, and less dirty. That can only take place if we adopt technology, bring production techniques into the mix, talk about prefabrication or modular, which is already happening. And one great example is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, or the Housing for All program, in which there is a technology submission, and there's special emphasis given to producing these 20 million houses using advanced, appropriate, superior technology. And you'll see so much innovation taking place, but bringing along with that innovation is workforce development. Another example from the same program, BMTPC, I work closely with their executive director, Dr. Shailesh Agarwal, has started a certificate program to train supervisors and project managers in these innovative housing technologies. Because without that, they are not taught in civil engineering and architecture programs across our country. So you need that upskilling, giving frontline workers, as Dr. Vasudevan said, more information about these innovative housing technologies so that they can be program managed, project managed, and brought into mainstream construction in India. So I think those are some of the issues that I'll probably go deeper into as we progress, talk more about technology and what my views are on Industry 4.0 and how they link to the people.
Thank you, Dr. Sawhney. I think it's a very, very good setting. There is this, on the one hand, the massification of the skilling. On the other hand, some people need to wear the periscopes and look at what's coming. And I think you are at the cutting edge of looking at Construction 4.0 and other frameworks for looking at what do we need to do in order to be looking at the skilling requirements going forward, and what do we actually do to get those skills in place. So it's a beautiful perspective that you're coming from, and we will be certainly coming back to you for several questions in these areas that you just now outlined. Thank you so much. Let me go on to Mr. Narayanan for his opening remarks. I would like to quickly introduce him. Mr. Narayanan has over 27 years experience in management consulting and industry, worked across sectors, starting his career in information technology, spanning across financial services, logistics, energy, retail, and government. His current focus is on education, skill development, and social sector advisory. He is the national champion for KPMG Impact, a global movement by KPMG to support clients in building sustainable businesses and institutions. He has led many engagements for leading multilateral and bilateral agencies like World Bank, FCDO, ADB, GSZ, USAID in their education and skill development programs. He's been in the expert committee of Ministry of Human Resources Development, now known as the Ministry of Education. In the board of studies in many leading private universities, he is part of various committees for education and skill development in leading industry forums such as CII and FICCI. He's been with KPMG for the last 19 years, and prior to that, he had worked with Arthur Andersen, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and CMC Limited. Over to you, Mr. Narayanan, for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Raghavan. Thank you so much for those very nice and kind introduction. And thanks, Siddharth and the BlueCircle team for giving me this opportunity. This is fascinating. Since we started our journey in skill development, three sectors have been fascinating: agriculture, building and construction, and textiles. And I'll explain as we go. And the context here is building and construction. And there are many things that Gayathri and Mr. Sawhney had alluded, and I'm trying to give some numbers to it so that we kind of have an idea of that. So this is a sector, we'll come to agriculture later, but that's not the context, so I'll not perhaps get deeper into that. But here is a sector that has 82.5% of people unskilled, and we refer to it there. And of the 82.5 unskilled, I'll give you some breakup, which will be startling. And within that, only 10% or less than 10% is supposed to be skilled, and the rest of it are semi-skilled or somewhere near that. Even in that skill, we don't know what is the skill percentage and other stuff. A lot of what we are going to speak in terms of skills not being there, skill gap, is all about this 10% skills people, and there we are finding gaps. right? The other statistics that kind of is very interesting and startling is 80%, and that is very nicely Mr. Sawhney kind of said the base of the pyramid and how it moves. And I'll give you the size of the base now. 80% of the workforce here is 10th standard or below. 80%. And 15% are ITIs or those who get a vocational education after their 10th pass and other. They are still not diploma holders. 2% are diploma holders. And only 2% are engineers, and the rest 1% constitutes all your PhDs, MBAs, chartered accountants, lawyers, all other professionals that you can think of. So the pyramid is really like that, like where we are looking at a large base, and this base constitutes of mostly unskilled, what we call as unskilled labor. And like Mr. Sawhney and Gayathri pointed out, many of them are in what is called as unorganized, and that is another big dimension which makes this very unique. Like not just they are unskilled, they are also in unorganized. Thereby, the well-being and other things of these people is very unique compared to any other sector, and hence the interest in the sector from a skill development, from government policies and other perspective as well. But before we get into that, just wanted to highlight that in spite of all these things, we did a study for National Skill Development Corporation about 3 years back, in fact, and then we tried to do a refresh on that. So what I'm going to say could be a little dated. And with COVID-19, many of us don't even know what is happening in the market right now. The things are changing so rapidly. But having said that, when we went to the industry folks and asked, what is the skill gap that you see? And when I say the skill gap, this is going to be the top 1-2% where the skill gap I'm going to say now, is they said there is not big project management that is happening. Project financing has been an issue. And they also talked about safety, health related issues are not being, they are not adept in that. They also talked about procurement. There's a lot of procurement that happens in building and construction sector, and many of the procurement is not very professional. Documentation, which is so crucial, is not something that people here are trained. And mind this, like I keep repeating, all these are in the top of the pyramid. We have so much skill gaps. And then we come to the middle of the pyramid. They talk about equipment handling. Many of them don't know what are the modern equipments and how do you handle that. Finishing as a skill in many areas across. They say finishing is not a skill that we see here, which we see integrated in many other economies. When our worker goes to the Gulf countries, one of the key areas that he or she gets hammered is the finishing doesn't happen. And government procedures at the middle level, you need to know a lot about government procedures, about the local regulations, lay of the land, liaising with some of the local players, real estate and related norms. These are all came out as gaps that are there in the middle layer. Not going to talk about the bottom of the pyramid. Anyway, we term them as semi-skilled, unskilled labor. With this as the background, and there are 4 trends that I see, which I wanted to highlight before I close, this chance that has been given to me. One, the target sectors, like Mr. Raghavan also pointed out, and this is a sector that is the base for many sectors, right? And look at how those sectors are changing. Right, you go to one of the largest contributor to this, the oil and gas, the utility sector, that is changing dramatically. We're talking about renewables, we're talking about alternates, and the need for that is changing. And talk about a little more closer home, like take the banking sector, the concept of a branch is dramatically changing. Talk about any of these sectors, the need itself is changing. So here is a building and construction sector that is used to a certain kind of demand. Now that demand is changing and hence they need to cope up. That's point number 1. Point number 2, the way skills that are required in these sectors. I mean, it's okay that we got the sectors. What is the kind of job role that is required in this sector is changing dramatically, right? For example, we are now talking about many of these things which happened on the ground. Imagine, and this Mr. Sawhney alluded to, there are prefabrication that is happening in a big way, and most of the workers now could be required inside a room and not at the work site. And this is a big change for somebody who's working in the sector. How are we going to cope up with the changes that are happening as requirement in the website, in the sector, which was hitherto in a certain direction. Now, the job role, the third point is, and that could be because of technology, that could be by other areas, the job role is changing because of the mechanization that is happening in the space. The mechanization is happening faster than we think. I'll give you an example. We were doing a project for one of the state governments, and then we were exploring where they're predominantly employed. And I was very intrigued to find out, like in one of the areas, and they thought they were modern, right? This is one of those areas where they are laying solar panels and other things for alternate energy construction company. And the job role was changing, and I'll explain how. Earlier, this needed able-bodied men who knew how to do this, how to lay this, how to maintain this, and all those things. This company has introduced robots, and because of which suddenly the requirement changed to able-bodied men who can go there and lay that to somebody who can control these robots, which needed a bit of programming, a bit of patience, and suddenly from that able-bodied men, it turned down to patient girls who know modern technologies who can work with it. The dramatic change is something that they were not used to and they were struggling. This is an example that the extent which mechanization can impact this, and hence the changes. It's not as if jobs are lost. The changes that are happening is something that we need to be cognizant. The last point is also in terms of how training happens in the sector. This is one of those sectors, like we said earlier, the unskilled content is more, but because of which we are also highlighting the productivity loss. How are we going to change this? Are we going to bring some of the modern learning techniques into this? Or is it going to continue the traditional on-the-job training that is happening? Are we bringing in simulation techniques into it? How are we going to get assessment methods here to say which of the labor is we can pay more? Or how do we bring in career progression and other things to these people so that skilling, reskilling, upskilling makes sense in the sector? So these are all the points that we need to ponder in my view. And let me close this opportunity given to me by another statistic, and this is to you, Mr. Sawhney. It is not just the total size. Our study says 3 years back, in the past 5 years, the incremental labor that was required is over 50 million. The incremental labor itself is more than your Australia and Canada population put together. The sector is mega huge and one of the largest in the world. So thank you for the opportunity. Would be happy to come back with any specific questions. Sir, you are on mute, Mr. Raghavan.
Thank you, Mr. Narayan. That's very helpful background, and I think you have covered a whole span of areas in these opening remarks. Lays a very good foundation. I think, ladies and gentlemen, so far what we really have heard is a beautiful setting of the whole environment of the size and the skilling requirements, the issues that are involved. Now we are going to jump right into some of the actual practices that are happening, actual solutions that have been tried out, and you will hear from the panelists what's been happening in those directions. So we'll go right into that. I'm going to move to Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan for a couple of important areas to explore. The first is, you always talked about, this is what Mr. Narayan also was talking about, changing landscape of the assets. And in your conversation, you talked about the 4 quadrants, the infrastructure quadrant, the commercial and small, commercial and housing, and large plotted homes, and very small housing kind of a thing. So the important question is, there is a very large, one is to talk about the incremental frontline workers, as you call them. Now, I'll never call labor. I think you changed me forever. So the incremental need for frontline workers is one issue, but we should never forget the installed population, if you will, of the existing frontline workers. That is a large number. It could be 60 million, 75 million, I don't know. Those numbers are a little bit floating around in the environment. But the important point is, what are we going to do about this? And you are very passionate about this whole concept of recognition of prior learning as an important element, important vector to really take the existing population of frontline workers and move them to a destination of appropriately skilled environment. So could you talk a little bit about the whole concept of recognition of prior learning, the concept, use cases, and how can we use it in How can we use it for building a career ladder, as you were mentioning, as well as in the whole area of reskilling and upskilling, that the technology is driving them. One thing is that if a new technology is coming up, if there is a new frontline worker force that is being deployed, it's easy. It's like writing a paragraph for the first time. Now what we are having to do is to edit something that's already been done. And how do we do that? With the technology coming in, we need to bank on the existing large population of the frontline workers. So could you talk to us a little bit about this?
Let me first spend some time on the concept of recognition of prior learning. Right? Recognition of prior learning is almost self-explanatory. It says that you have a knowledge which needs to be recognized, and therefore the assessment that you do needs to do that. Today, I think the problem lies in two fronts. One is the assessment itself, is the complexity of assessment, right? How do you assess where there is an individual dynamic and a group dynamic? Both are important in a productivity context. And construction is a group activity. It is never an individual activity. And I'm talking of the large base of frontline is always a group activity. So I think there needs to be some thought which is given to rethinking that. And I'll take an analogy. The government and the leather sector have really adopted technology solutions for it. The measurement of productivity does not have to be done as individual certification, whereas the construction recognition of prior learning is very individual based. They measure me for my skill set, whereas the need of the hour is recognition of prior learning for a set of people who are working together. I think that's the first change, according to me, which is required. The second, as you rightly said, and I think all my co-panelists have been stressing on, is the need for adaptation or adapting to technology. See, technology is sweeping the sector. And I'll just take two case points here. For example, we had carpentry in the 2000s. They were on construction sites, there were carpenters, there were bar benders, two roles during construction. Bar benders are not there anymore because, you have a gun which does it. So you don't need a person who sits and ties it anymore. You don't have wooden frames anymore, except in very high-end homes, you don't have it anymore. So you have fabricators who have come in. Similarly, the interiors have changed. Narayanan referred to the finishing trades which are there. The relative spend on interiors has completely gone up, and therefore the technology with tiles can be stuck now. It doesn't have to be the old way. So the need is huge. Now here is where we underestimate the population, according to me. Because they are 10th, they haven't finished their 10th grade. Our assumption is they cannot learn other than being taught militaristically. Stand above their head, teach them, and that's the way to learn. How many workers do we see with smartphones, right? They are watching micro content on a continuous basis. I'm not a great favor of complete digitization, but I think blended learning needs to be come in, and continuous learning has to happen. And there are ways today. Technology is not the problem. The mindset is the problem. So the mindset of everybody who is interested in upskilling and reskilling needs to be thought through from, borrowing Mr. Anil Hassani's comment, is from the construction 4.0. It's not the reverse. It's not from where I am, but it's where I want to go. I think we need to look at the learning, teaching learning methods and assessment methods for the future, not saying, my level is low and therefore I need to come up, but look at the reverse and see how do I map. I'd say that's the big change that we need to make.
Thank you. Actually, you're raising a very important point. When you talk about, let's say you have a subcontractor, and the subcontractor gets paid on the total quantum of work that gets turned out by a group of people. In other words, the output is measured in a group, whereas the skilling is measured as an individual. What gets missed out is the whole idea of interpersonal coordination, relationships, behavioral aspects of it get missed out when you do an individual assessment and do not do anything to do with the group. I think it's a very interesting point. I am not sure whether any good work is going on in this whole idea of collective group certification, given the fact that the frontline workers are extremely migratory and they keep moving from one project to another. And the whole idea of a group, the concept of a group keeps transforming every time they get put onto another job or another project. But I think you raised an important point, a destination that we should aim for. And there are obviously challenges in actually implementing it, just as we have challenges in everything else. But it's a fantastic concept. It makes a lot of sense, given that we're measuring the output as a group. And output as a group is what really matters overall in the skilling area. But I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Gayathri, for one more area, because I think these are sort of linked in the whole idea of training the existing large workforce population. While we will move on to other ways of the future, I think there is a here and now situation which is gigantic, and that I want to kind of talk about it a little bit more. I think if I remember Dr. Sawhney's statement yesterday, he said that a built environment is a project only for a short time, and it is a living asset for the rest of its life. I think he said it so beautifully, it stuck in my head. So when you look at that and look at post-construction related activities, handover of assets, the proper handshake, maintenance of assets, and the skill that is required in order to maintain those assets very well, because these skilled people are lined in and sent into the asset management completely independent and disconnected to those who actually built it. So what is happening in that environment? What are the implications for skilling in that area? And what are the best ways of training these workers? What should the institutions do? And what should the training look like? Could you talk a little bit about that?
So I think, as you said, it's Dr. Sawhney brought it out beautifully. There's a huge void there. Who owns at what point of time determines who's interested in the maintenance. So I'm going to take a rather drastic case at this point of time, and it is not so bad in every case, is the PSA plants. I think today every one of us knows three terms which we all didn't know in April of last year. The COVID has changed it. We all know oxygen concentrators, oxygen cylinders, and PSA plants. If nothing else, this is what COVID gave us, is three words. Now, these three, if I take the PSA plants, the classic is all of these are constructed by plumbers and fitters mostly, and masons. Now, look at the beauty which has to happen. Who's going to maintain them? I don't even know if anybody knows the protocols of maintenance of these. And, they've gone to hospital, somebody donated it, it's come with a warranty, but there's no SLA for it. Whereas when you buy a phone, there's always an SLA. Buy a TV, there's an SLA. But the entire problem that is there is service levels are not signed off. So if service levels are not signed off, then the question is whose accountability is it? I mean, as I had started with this, it was a dramatic point for making my point of what we don't know. So we moved from 24 PSA plants to, by December end, 2,000 PSA plants. And, I dread to think who's thinking through how do you repair them? How do you maintain them? What happens during breakdown? But the same applies to several other assets, right? And again, just in the interest of being a devil's advocate, take the STP plants, the water maintenance plants which are there. I am always appalled by the fact of there's always questions on who maintains them. To me, it's obvious, water. You're not even talking of anything else, right? It should be codified. There should be people who are able to do, and one needs to separate regular maintenance from breakdown repair, which is where you need a fast delivery there. So in the interest of time, let me just stop here. But in my mind, one of the things that is absolutely important for the industry to look at, and in that context, people like us who are in the adjacency of the industry or interested in the well-being of the workers of the industry, need to look at is what are the SLAs and what are the SOPs that we sign off, because skilling and reskilling cannot happen in vacuum. It happens against a service level. And increasingly, I'm coming to the conclusion as to anybody who's skilled is not about wage alone. It's about the service that you do. And this is an industry, just like the healthcare industry, which provides a service to the community. It gives you the living experience. We live in a built environment. In that case, who services that becomes very important. And if the SLAs are not written out, it is not codified and followed. See, one is codification to implementation. I think the gap is there. That gap needs to be filled.
Excellent. You are talking about a proper handover, confirmation of SLAs at the time of handover and signing off of the SLAs, and having people who are vested with the responsibility of maintenance and breakdown to have the view specifically for each of those situations. When you're talking all this, suddenly a thought crosses my mind. That is, if you are developing, let's say, a large residential project, so invariably when the assets are handed over to the asset management arm, you end up leaving something called as an attic stock. So I'm even wondering, a certain number of frontline workers who are engaged in the actual construction of the asset should be left behind along with the asset. So whoever is trying to manage this actually employs those people because they know how to do it, whether it's an infrastructure of the road of the city or the building or the specific equipment that is there. So it may be a moot point, but it's something I think is worth thinking about, because you can, of course, upskill and reskill anybody. But how about having the benefit of an experience of somebody who's actually built it, moving along and staying back with the equipment, staying back with the infrastructure to be able to look after it very well. So this is just a thought. So, but those are beautiful points, Dr. Gayathri. I think you touched upon the core of the existing large-scale, frontline workforce where the skilling is absolutely required. Now I'm going to move to Dr. Anil Sawhney. Mr. Sawhney, you are a specialist in looking at little bit larger scale, global, a much more formalized method of imparting skilling and training. Can you talk a little bit about the School of Built Environment that you had actually authored, as well as the importance of skilling in asset management, given that you are very, very passionate about the concept of it's always a short time as a project, but it's a long time, lifetime of a performing asset. So could you talk to us a little bit? Dr. Gayathri did touch upon the skilling requirements, skilling environment in an asset management, but could you tie that up with the overall School of Built Environment and a formal method of approaching this whole issue?
Sure. So I think, as we all just discussed, it's really a pyramid and every layer is interconnected, and different approaches perhaps are needed at different levels of the pyramid. So one of the things that we did was back in 2012, 2013, as part of a larger team, came up with this plan of creating the School of Built Environment, probably one of the first ones, which in the name itself tells you that we wanted to look at the sector in a much more holistic way. It's not about just designing, it's not just about project management, but also about the whole of life and whole of industry approach was part of that thinking when we talked about School of the Built Environment. So this school essentially brought industry, academia, and government together to come up with a solution for perhaps that core professional layer, where traditionally in India, and in fact in many parts of the world, we have traditional civil engineering and architecture programs And they do a wonderful job in training and producing graduates who are good at designing and engineering. But you will see that there is a gap when it comes to taking this whole of life view of the asset. How do you project manage it? How do you ensure that the projects are delivered on time, on budget? And how do you ensure that this longer term view is taken into account when we are imparting skills to graduates? So that's the reason why we decided to create this school in which really the knowledge lies at the interface of these traditional disciplines of engineering, business, and architecture. So the students gain knowledge about these dimensions of how to deliver a project, but more importantly, how to deliver a community serving asset that has been thought through and that can be facility managed or asset managed over its entire life. So that's an example where firsthand we try to bring in various expertise, various domain knowledges, and impact perhaps a very small but yet very crucial layer of the pyramid, that is the future project managers and asset managers of our sector. So in doing so within the school, we also, my colleagues who were experts in facility management came from the industry, actually carved out probably the first structured facility management program in which large employers, large occupiers need this expertise over the life of an asset to have experts who will come and help them with this core function of facility management. So having these programs adjacent to each other with cross-pollinated ideas of the whole of life of that asset actually helps. And I think that's a very useful model to be replicated across India in order to produce graduates who have a good understanding of that project and of that asset in such a way that we can produce quality assets that help the community, that serve the citizens, and are really thought through from what we call cradle to disposition or cradle to cradle. Fragmented mindset in terms of producing something short term, thinking only about the first cost. We are very good at doing that, but I think we need to shift away from that. And that also could begin in our education system, where we educate new graduates in that kind of thinking, so that going forward, we produce assets that we can manage.
Yeah, actually, you're raising an important point. The whole concept of finishing school has been in vogue. Especially, I'm a little bit familiar with the IT industry, where the last semester of the engineering graduates, they end up learning certain things which are quite attuned to making them employable. So I can understand that very well in the white collar kind of an workforce environment. When we roll down to the frontline workers category, you were mentioning certain things about user-oriented programs. So would you be able to talk a little bit about the concept of the user-oriented programs at this level of workforce? And also, can you give us some use cases and examples that our audience can kind of relate to?
Sure. So one of the most constant, being part of academia for a long time, one of the suggestions, comments, or complaints, depending on how you want to look at it, from the industry is that you don't produce job-ready graduates. And that applies to actually all layers. So one of the things that I think came out of IIT Madras and IIT Delhi was this idea of user-oriented programs. Okay, if you think we are not producing job-ready graduates for the construction sector, why don't you sit on the table and tell us how we can design something that'll be more meaningful, more applicable, more useful, and will solve your business needs. I'll go into the detail of that separately, but before that, I think there is a recent excellent example coming out of the UK, where many of my colleagues, in fact, RICS is based in the UK. So we have the UK government launched few years ago a funded Trailblazer program. It's an apprenticeship program that helps folks who are interested in the construction sector. So really, it provides money, it provides employment, it provides structured training. It helps people do what Dr. Vasudevan has been saying, upskilling, recognition of their prior learning, but put them into a career path, a progression that will help them based on their needs, based on their aspirations, based on their circumstances, wherever they want to go in the sector. So you could have apprenticeship program where you can pretty much at a vocational level be recognized and become part of the industry. If you want to grow further, you can move into a diploma kind of a situation. And further, if you are more interested as a student, you could go into a degree program that can then actually get connected to RICS, because we are part of that Trailblazer program, in which you can then end up receiving a sort of an assessment from RICS and become a chartered professional, as our members are called. So it's a really coming up with that kind of a journey, a total picture, but in a very funded and systematic fashion, where the employer, these large construction companies and government, pool in money to bring that change that everyone talks about. But just rather than talking about it, come up with a program that works. And something like that can be replicated. And I know that the Construction Sector Skill Council is coming up with that map, already has a map of where you want to be in terms of a sector when it comes to learning and development. So I think that's an excellent example of how, again, government, industry, and academia come together to produce that pipeline in a very funded, systematic, structured program. Now, when it comes to user-oriented program, it's simply, I think, IIT Madras, IIT Delhi, for example, worked with large players from the construction sector, without naming names, came up with a scholarship program, essentially, where civil engineering, architecture, electrical, mechanical engineering graduates can go through a selection process, get employed by that large construction sector player, and then also do the master's program at IIT Delhi or IIT Madras. And I think more institutions have now been added to that program. Again, structured, funded, thought through, user-oriented program where these graduates then go become long-term employees of these large construction companies. Similar example at IIT Delhi, DMRC approached IIT Delhi to come up with a program that's very similar, takes these electrical, mechanical, civil, architecture graduates and imparts them knowledge that is very relevant to urban transit projects. How do you project manage those? How do you bring asset management principles? How do you look at cost, time dimensions? How do you look at safety, sustainability, and digital approaches to construction? So I think these are some excellent examples, but perhaps exemplars rather than mainstream. And I think most of the effort, most of the energy goes in mainstreaming these kinds of ideas. And I think that's where Dr. Vasudevan's work is so crucial, because this is really talking to the masses. If you're talking, as Mr. Narayanan said, 100 million people, you can't solve that with a few exemplars. You need to really come up with a bottom approach.
Yeah, I think the to Dr. Sawhney is that I think the use cases that you gave, as well as the user-driven oriented programs, they all talk very clearly to a little bit of a higher level of workforce. I think the jury is still out about how can we apply them at the level at which we are talking about, namely the frontline workers who have been, who kind of 10th pass or dropouts. And how do we create such programs? Is a whole new ball game. I guess we will leave that point right now, but it is certainly that the model is quite out there for people to adopt and move forward. So thanks for those comments. And I want to ask Mr. Narayanan a question. Basically, Mr. Narayanan, you've been talking about the dynamics of the changing technologies in the construction. And along with that is also changing methodologies, changing methods and materials. So what are the implications of that in skilling? What should the industry be looking out for? And what are the implications in skilling for now? And what are the implications in the transient workforce environment going forward? I don't want to really look at 10 years. I think we want to look at the near term as well. What are your thoughts, and how can we really improve the skilling and reskilling and upskilling in this environment? What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Raghavan. So that's a very interesting and topical question. So I mean, when you look at the impact of technology, in my mind, I put it in two parts. One is the building construction related technologies, and the other one is the digital technologies. And both are impacting the way things happen, right? If I were to, I mean, you were asking this question, I was just thinking like, if somebody were to get into a construction site in 2000 and look at how things have been happening, and where to come and look at now, the shift is dramatic. And it is dramatic because if somebody had gone in 1950 into a site and then gone into 2000 into a site, the shift to what is happening now. So the shift is getting exponential in a manner of speaking, and it is not linear. And to that extent, like, I can think of technologies like, for example, I'm no expert in building construction, but look at an M-sand coming in and that creating changes in the way structures are being built. A reinforced cement concrete is being looked at differently, and every day you see different kind of cement blocks coming in, newer technologies, newer binding agents coming in, and glass being used a lot more than ever before. Are people trained in doing this? Right from the engineers who design this to the supervisors to the workers, how much of the changes that have happened in construction industry, be it in material, I'm not even coming to technology of managing that yet. These things have changed. That is point number one. And the associated point is also the demand that is changing. Like, the homes don't look the same ever before. It's not only because of materials. Now, like, you go to residential complex, you are not just a high rise. Now you want, some place where you can have a club room, or the dynamics are very different in bringing a club room or a swimming pool inside that. Or for that matter, for in industrial constructions, how there are many things that are required, which are not even thought of before because of the changing requirements of these industries. But even more stark is the digital technologies and their impact. In a recent engagement that we were doing, it was for a university, and when the university was being built, the promoter was commenting, like, earlier when we want to get an idea of the status of how this has happened, it used to take a week, and it was a 200-acre campus. So people go to various parts and do some, finding out what is, note down all the whatever and come back and stitch it all together. All he did was he used a drone. And the drone went to every nook and corner of the 200-acre campus and got minute details that humans take a lot more. And within 3 hours, he had a report, which I would suspect is much more accurate. Now, what does that mean? Those people who've been doing the surveys and other things before, are they gone jobless? Or are they going to operate the drone from then onwards? And the drone also brings in more and more requirements that wasn't there earlier. Like, earlier, what he or she was not doing, we started doing because you have technology. Because you have data points, I'm now able to do some predictive analytics, and I can tell you how things will behave. Because you have modern, imaging technologies, now the construction itself is looking different. Forget the CCTV cameras, I'm looking at modern equipments that are being built across. Somebody was commenting.
Mr. Narayan, sorry to interrupt. The real issue is how does it impact the frontline worker? And what should be done differently in order to scale them?
Point is, forget the frontline workers. Is anybody trained on these things? Do we have anybody in the site who's been trained on these things coming down? Neither the site engineer nor the frontline worker. So how are we going to cope? And the change is also being exponential. So the skilling part of it, which was almost absent, cannot work that way. And how do we bring skilling here is the challenge. Again, digital technologies help. You have online technologies. And like Gayathri mentioned, now you have the frontline workers, each of them having a smartphone. Are we leveraging the access that we have now that was not there even 10 years back? How do we bring in skilling, which is much necessary now for our own interest, is what I would think as the changes that we need to do. And hence the curriculum, and hence how we teach these skilling workers. How do you make the fulfillment happen? All of those things need to change.
Yeah, sure. I think that kind of gives a guidance as to the significance of technology that's going to change not only the skills required, but the level of people that are required in order to adopt to the technology. So I really appreciate those points. And I think we still need to, I kind of keep on worrying back about the existing large population of workforce. And I think we need to really worry about how we are going to reskill and upskill them and what's going on. And so in this connection, I want to go to Dr. Gayathri again for some points which I would like to really hear from her. The first one is what's happening in creating a common language. For example, when do you certify somebody to be a plumber? When do you certify somebody to be a qualified farm work, frontline worker? Or when do you qualify somebody to be capable of working on high pressure hydraulic lines? So is there anything happening? I know there's a national qualification framework, etc. But how is it transcending into the real world? Is there a lot of work going on in standardizing the job roles, standardized assessments, and is there any universal recognition of skills? So could you talk to us a little bit about it? I'm going to come up with another follow-up question, but this is the first of the questions that I am deeply concerned about skilling and reskilling of the existing workforce, and I'm very keen to extract all the value that each of you is bringing to the table.
So as you said, there is a national skill qualification framework, which the National Skill Development Corporation really evangelized with the sector skill councils. I think stellar work has gone in. For the first time, a common language was attempted. So I think to that extent, we should actually credit them with going very far. I could also be called the culprit of the system, right? Therefore, I've been part of a lot of those discussions and system. But when I look back, and if I had to write the report card now, and I'm doing it as I said, as both a culprit and a student of the system, I'd actually not score ourselves for more than 30%. The reason being that, and I said, this is retrospect, right? So one is always intelligent post happening. I think the challenge has been, we adopted the educational framework in order to actually create the framework, for the whole common language that, I'm just quoting from you again, while creating the common language or calling it the National Occupational Standards, we adopted the educational framework. Whereas the people we were dealing were actually in the, they function in a live environment. And I'm just sort of going to belabor this point a bit. So for example, if I have done economics in my bachelor's, it does not mean I am an economist who can work at the RBI or a monetary economist. I could have a range. That's the beauty of education, right? You can, as you work, you specialize and you go into this. Now skills, this is very dramatic. As you rightly said, how do you say who's a plumber, right? A plumber is somebody who lays the line. Outside, a plumber is also somebody who fixes a Jaguar tap. But the range of the plumber, both the skill sets are drastically different. So I think the key is for skills particularly, one needs to micro-credential, which means that one does not have to, one must have the ability to pick up constantly, and which strangely, the frontline worker is very capable of. We underestimate what they are. I would actually go to the extent of saying that probably the higher educated personnel in the country are not so hands-on. And I've often heard it on site where people say, "Ki wo engineer hai, usko pata nahi hai." So the point is that they are very, very nifty with their skill sets and dexterity, which means that the learning environment should have been adapted. So the point, I think, how to do it is something we all have to understand. And I think from listening to Dr. Sawhney and the application in higher education and the way UK is adapted, I think there are ways. It is for us to open our eyes and not be close to individual certification. And as you rightly said, there are problems there. But if I micro-credential and I'm NOS based in my assessments, I think it should solve our problems. So one possibly gigantic jump, and then, correcting the system constantly. Now it is a 360-degree turn needed, and then correction, I think, is the way to go.
Unfortunately, many of the organizations always worry about, if I invest so much and skill my group, and what if they leave? And there's a famous statement, I think it's Tim Cook who mentioned it, I could be wrong, who said that if you're worried about the fact that people leave after you train them, imagine them staying without the skills. So it's really an issue. It requires really an open-mindedness and willingness to, there's a leap of faith required that if you skill them, you're going to be better off. It's a leap of faith. But I think the important problem that I can see in this conversation is, while there is a good body of knowledge about, let's say, standardization, methodologies like the microcredits, and encouraging individuals to build up a passport of skills, and then over time, universal recognition, all these are possible to happen. But huge gap between these conceptual frameworks existing and actual industry really implementing them for the benefit of the industry. I think this is probably not germane to the construction industry. It is the overall skill environment and landscape in the country compared to many other countries. As we all know, certifiable skills percentage is either low single digits or just about double digit in the country. Whereas countries like the UK, Australia, they are in the region of 90+%. So if somebody comes to your house as a plumber, he will have skills which have been certified. So it's a very, very long journey to reach that in the construction frontline workers category. But I feel that there is a need for a revolution of a kind, which will take these frameworks which are available, the body of knowledge is available, to actually create a methodology to reach there. But that's where I have my next question for you is, what is the current state of the art in training delivery? How can it impart skilling as opposed to simply, heralding a bunch of people into a training room and say, I have done health and safety training for them, right? How do we really impart training? You touched upon NSDC and the work that you've actually done with them. The whole idea of NSDC and the skill mission, how much have they really moved the needle from when they started, particularly in this sector? I know that there are other sectors where there have been a decent amount of impact, a decent journey that has happened. But in the construction industry, where do you think it is?
So I think there would be a bit of a disservice comparing to other sectors, because I think in the construction sector, the first thing that had to happen was for people to be heralded together. Training was a it was not even something that one spoke about. So the last decade has seen an acceptance amongst industry on training, an acceptance in the skill missions and NSDC on training. What is now required is to change an audit framework. See, the entire system of government funds is based on how do you know it is spent properly. So as an organization, my effort is to play to my baap, right? My paymaster would be the government. Therefore, I have to say, listen, I will give you this document, I will give you that document, rather than actually look at the what is required from an individual perspective. That is point number one. Point number two is, I think we're all confused on how to calculate what is the implication of scaling on wages. So this is, again, an educational framework which is applied, but never really taken in education. For example, I don't think, and Dr. Sawhney, you may correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Columbia University would say, listen, I guarantee you that you will get this wage. But for a skilling, that is required. If we change it to say, how do you train? You know, the methodologies of training, because they're adults. They're people who walked out of education. And today the variety of training tools available to one is actually mind-boggling, right? I mean, from a simple Lego toys could be used for training, you know, equivalent. You don't always need simulators. Digitization has come on an entire basis. So if we blend learning and experiential learning, what Dr. Sawhney referred to as apprenticeship, but apprenticeship is today seen as a wage arbitrator. Instead of that, if it is taken as learning, I think we'll go a far way. So NSDC and skill missions, to summarize, need to rethink. And that's why I mentioned it's a 360-degree that all of us in the system have to be ready for. Now, it's painful, it's going to be difficult, but yes, you came up to a point. It's not the best. Reinvent yourself, go back in, see what's relevant for the industry, what's relevant for the worker, and then skill and reskill. Because as you have been repeatedly saying, it is a large group of people. It is not a group anymore. It is a percentage of population. We don't, as a country, have the luxury to walk out and say, hey, you know what? We don't know what will happen. Technology is coming in. Changes in the sector is inevitable. It's staring us in the face. Prefabs are going to come. Drones are going to come. Mapping is going to happen with technology. We don't have the luxury to say, you know what? You didn't complete your 10th. You were there in the sector for 2 years. Sorry, bye-bye. I think we need to change our mindsets and apply the training learning methodologies which are available. I'm not asking us to reinvent. I'm asking us, and again, I'm saying this because I am part of this system, to wake up and redo it.
Thank you. I think you're being very, very candid, and you've been modest in all, despite all the contributions and great thinking that you've developed over the years. You've been very modest. We really appreciate that. I think this raises an important question. It's almost like saying, we know what to do. We know how to do this. We know what is to be done. We know how to do it at a unit level, but we don't know how to do it on an universal level, right? Because there are multiple stakeholders in the system, starting with the workers themselves, going on to the employers, then going on to people who are specialists in skill development, going on to the government, which is vested with this huge problem. In a way, it's vested with this huge problem, because if 10-11% of the GDP is coming from a sector which is probably employing 10% or more of the workforce, and if that workforce is unskilled, I think it is an invisible drag on the economy. The sooner one is able to recognize it and really find the economic damages arising out of it, and therefore allocate an appropriate amount of funding to completely change the skilling environment, I think we are just closing our eyes and living with a compromise. It's a sort of a conclusion I'm coming to. Therefore, the point is, I can on this webinar talk passionately about all the sectors, but we need to get practical and see what could be near-term steps. I'm going to move to Mr. Narayanan, because as a consultant, he has looked at it at a macro level across the years. Here is a question for you, and I will not be disappointed if you don't have a whole answer, because this is a very complicated question, right? Let's say there are stakeholders. You've got the government, you've got the industry that is employing this workforce, you've got people who are very trained in skilling, You got the suppliers and other vendors of the industry who are actually ushering in new technologies and new methods. And you got the actual labor, workforce, frontline workers. Now, how do you see these things panning out? In your mind, could you articulate or make some wild guesses? What could be one or two actions and taken by which of those stakeholders that could move us in the direction of a solution?
Very interesting, very interesting. And wish we have answers for all those, but there's no harm in attempting. So I think government does definitely play a role in certain large sectors. Like Gayathri said, it is no more a sectoral issue. It is almost the GDP economy of the country kind of stuff. Like, they need to do it. And the inefficiencies that we see in many of the projects is just a testimony as to why this should kind of improve. But we are also ignoring, in some sense, what they call as the elephant in the room. Some of the key stakeholders, are they really committed to skilling? Or do they find it beneficial that you don't need to pay more to a skilled laborer, knowing very well that the skilling can actually improve the efficiency of the process? So it starts, in my view, from those who are going to be economically, commercially be benefited out of such skilled labor being a part of the system. Then comes the end user and the benefits and other things that kind of flows. That is one. Second, I would think those people who are bringing in these technologies, if they want that to be adopted, if they want that to do well, they need to take some proactive steps. And I'll explain how that is to be happening. We recently talked about, during the COVID time, a skill varsity, online skill varsity. We're trying to, kind of use the occasion to see if we can bring in the learning part of it to workers, not just in construction, across, and then use the industry, the network of them, to actually do the fulfillment, either through an apprenticeship program or simply use their assets to do these things. So, which means that I need to go beyond the benefit that I will get out of the skilled laborers and look at a little larger ecosystem, but eventually, because it is going to help me, right? When you said, like, if I train the worker, what will happen? They'll go to some other firm. Some other firm will train worker and I'll take them, right? In a manner of speaking, you are going to be, unless we bring in the industry stakeholders to the government, yes, they need to do that. And the stakeholders in the industry forum, the sector skill council, and the other forums in which people are represented should take a call that we will adopt these technologies for our own good. And then comes the people who are owning these technologies, who will play this vital role by initially giving some of these things free of cost, either in terms of equipments or in terms of people who can train on them, and many other things who can come. The learner, in my view, while Gayathri rightly said they are willing to learn, upskilling, reskilling is going to be very crucial. The learner, in my view, comes the last because of the current social status or the position in which he or she is there.
So would you sort of say, therefore, the biggest and the strongest starting point is the ecosystem that is responsible for employing these frontline workers, and they should start realizing the total cost as opposed to just the first cost. Total cost will be absolutely efficient in case they recognize a skilled worker's productivity versus productivity and quality versus an unskilled worker's productivity and quality. And therefore, they should really divert some part of their so-called cost towards really upskilling and skilling. And there is a huge movement that comes about that aspect. Maybe there's a lot of help. Now, if you look at things like the apprenticeship scheme, what it really does is to provide for a small amount of subsidy for a small fraction of the total workforce population to kind of help them, skilling. They also do some work, do some reimbursement towards skilling and so on. But unfortunately, that as a measure is too feeble in the face of the enormity of the problem. And therefore, it looks like the developer construction industry ecosystem that is employing these people seem to willy-nilly inherit the first responsibility as per whatever discussions we are having. Over to you again.
I'm saying, if this doesn't happen, like, what you say is right. Ideally, if I'm the, like, the one who is into the system, I should take it. But if it doesn't happen, I think there should be a catalyst. And let me give you examples. In UK, large government projects are awarded only when you show that a percentage of people are skilled. And there is a 5% or 10%, which is really the margin that is held back, unless you show that there is some amount of people who are getting skilled. Forget all the fraud and other things that could happen. Willy-nilly, at some point of time, people will be, because there's a cost to a fraud also, right? I mean, they'll make sure that they start training people and things will happen as we have seen. So in my view, if things are not happening the way they are supposed to happen, there should be a catalyst that will kind of shake up the system and start making things to happen. So I do believe that if you incentivize the carrot and stick method, it will be a good beginning, and basis this, the sector is bound to get more and more people to be skilled.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point, and certainly something that at least the government projects and the companies which are employing large-scale contractors could perhaps start looking at such an option. One other point perhaps could be I just want to add to the thinking is that there are many component suppliers and equipment suppliers to the industry. And if they, as a part of their offering to the buyer, a certain amount of training, and make it possible for them to do to take a certain amount of frontline workforce to be trained, then it could induce the users to actually put a certain number of people through the training. Take, for example, if I'm a tile supplier and I'm very interested in fast installation of the tiles, because my ability to get orders from somebody who has a very short time is not there. Therefore, it's an issue. Therefore, how do
sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to quickly add, also in measures like production-linked incentives, skill should be a part of it. Absolutely. When there is a measure that is happening, how do you make sure that skills are a part of this expectation?
But Mr. Narayanan, unfortunately, production-linked incentive scheme are very highly targeted to blue-collar workers who are who are in the factory environment, and that's a completely different ball game. But you and I know that we are talking about a completely different sector of employee population in this case. So there are limitations applying PLI in this case. However, what I was trying to say was people who are supplying either an elevator or a tile, or people who know that the methodology adopted and the skilling that goes into the people who are working on them combined can actually make their product work out to be much more economical to the buyer, as opposed to just buying anything else and doing the old methods and damaging a lot and replacing a lot and so on and so forth. I think there is, so for me, I am kind of shuffling around a solution. The solution seems to be really the employer industry to view this very, very differently, and any kind of an incentive to make them look at it differently is a very strong starting point. And I would add that the supplier ecosystem to this industry could append a certain amount of training as a part of what they're doing. I think many of the software companies have gone very much ahead in this route. When they actually install a new software or create a new ERP to a company, they do involve a certain amount of training hours for the people who are going to be using on the system. So that could be another model. Well, I think this is too short a time frame for us to really create a comprehensive solution by the sheer nature of the topic and the sheer size of the issue. The 90 minutes of discussion, even with the best of minds on this issue, is not really leading to a full-fledged solution. But I think we have got a lot of pointers which, if they are worked together, could lead to some kind of solutions. But before we actually close the session, we are coming up to 5:30. I request your permission to exceed by about a couple of minutes. I just have one quick question I want to ask Dr. Anil Sawhney, is to take just 1 minute to talk about the whole concept of construction 4.0. Because when you go looking at the future, just as Dr. Gayathri said, prefabs will come and many other things are going to come. Construction 4.0. What does it mean very, very briefly? What are the implications in skilling and reskilling in that domain? Could I ask Dr. Anil to speak a little bit about this, please?
Sure. So I think, and it goes back to several questions that you asked. I think our industry needs to ask those questions, brutal questions to themselves, to ourselves. We have an image problem, first of all. So the sector itself is not very attractive to many people, to the broad population. The second question that we need to ask is, do we need 50 million unskilled workers? Or can we slowly start shifting to a system where we have, rather than that breakup that Mr. Narayanan gave, 80% out of which 90% of that 80% is unskilled or semi-skilled? Do we really need a person or few people helping pick up bricks and supply bricks to a mason? Do we really want to continue that sticks and big bricks approach? Imagine if the automotive sector had that. If you had 80% of your car manufacture being done by unskilled, semi-skilled people who left for Holi and other festivals, imagine riding your car and the quality issues that it may cause. So why do we treat buildings differently from a production point of view? So that then leads to this issue of a paradigm where we can become closer to production, or at least borrow best practices and principles from Industry 4.0. And that's what Construction 4.0 is. It really connects the emerging trends, technologies that are both technology enablers, process enablers, such as 3D printing, model-driven construction, design and construction, using technology, software, and other principles to make construction better. So Construction 4.0 is essentially a paradigm where you're utilizing the best practices available to you to make design, construction, operation, and end of life of your assets better. Probably need more time to explain, but essentially it borrows and adapts some of the Industry 4.0 trends and technologies. So I think slowly we need to start transitioning in that direction and not continue with the same old model of having 50 million or 80% unskilled, semi-skilled folks helping us build structures. I'm not saying employment will reduce. Probably the employment will improve because employment conditions will improve. You want your folks in controlled environment doing production work, reducing the dangerous, the difficult, and dirty work, and managing it in a process where it is controlled, and on-site work-face activities of assembly are very limited and structured so that you don't have safety issues, you don't have health issues, and other problems that our sector faces.
Thank you. I think that's quite a good thing. So essentially, what you're saying is, just as in waste management, the first thing is reduce. So you're saying that in the case of workforce skill issue, first of all, reduce the need for such a large skilled workforce. Therefore, you have less people to be skilled. Just turn the skilling environment into a skilling for something else, namely production in a controlled environment. So that's very good. I'm sure that this is a very, very good angle. For some strange reasons or a basket of reasons, the whole adoption process of prefab is a very slow process, has been a slow process in the country. And I think there has to come an inflection point. Of course, those of the people who are engaged in those who are proposing the cost for large-scale employment may not like the idea of substantial landscape shift in the number of people for whom this sector is giving livelihood as frontline workers. But then that's a completely different topic altogether. So I'm going to try and go to the closing section right now.
But I do want to just make minor point here. I'm not saying reduce employment. I'm just saying shift the bucket. So right now your base of the pyramid looks like 80% unskilled, semi-skilled. start shifting them into, by changing the way you construct, you start shifting the same number into a more controlled, skilled environment, then training becomes more relevant.
No, I do agree. You are not proposing reduction of employment as a direct recommendation, but I'm just doing the equation. When you use the same number of people in a higher productivity environment, I'm guessing you will need less people, unless the growth takes care of the productivity enhancement. So that's what I was thinking about. But I do understand. I think no industry can remain stagnant just because they're going to become better in productivity and probably employ less. I'm not at all in anywhere suggesting that. It's just a minor point that's added. So let me just go to the closing section. I would really request each of the panelists to give you a closing remarks. I would like to start with Dr. Gayathri. Dr. Gayathri, you also were mentioning that the point about the vendors and suppliers also participating a little bit in the training environment. You might like to just make a mention of it and then proceed to make your closing comments, please.
So I'm taking from where you were as to who gives the content, so to speak, right? Who owns that knowledge? Today, many suppliers have come forward, and many of them are actually looking at it. And I'm happy to name a few companies which really stand out, right? JSW, the Jindal Steelworks for fabricators, Nerolac, Asian Paints. The paint companies have been, I would say, at the forefront of it. They have often looked at it as also an influencer marketing. I think the difference is they're saying training, but they often, because they have so much product change which is happening, so they need to bring in and educate their influencers. But if it is married, and if we can create a platform, and given I'm on BlueCircle, I'm going to say it. What prevents it to be a Coursera kind of a platform, right? Everything doesn't have to be written. I mean, I'm increasingly going to the point that experiential learning can also be discussions. Today, peer learning and assessment can be thought differently. So can we create quote unquote blue circles for this and solve problems? Bring in suppliers, bring in companies there. So there needs to be, today they're doing it. As I said, it is in the influencer marketing realm, which needs to be brought into site specificities. So if we are able to do that, I think there will be a lot of change in what is happening. And obviously many more suppliers have to come in rather than, single and double digit as it is today, but the change is happening. So let me just conclude by saying that change is inevitable. Employee productivity increase is absolutely mandatory if wage has to increase. Wage will not increase if we keep something has to give. In my opinion, it is restructuring which is required. You don't require everybody here, but if you are able to provide service qualities, imagine 1,000 urban companies in smaller formats at all, 2.5 lakh villages, which are economically unviable. We create mechanisms where employment has to be thought differently from sector productivity and individual skill sets. So 100% reskilling, upskilling required, a complete re-evaluation of the training and learning methodologies, complete re-evaluation of assessment methodologies, and bringing in all stakeholders who have commercial interests to the forefront, other than a sponsor interest. A sponsor always has the problem of being the Maiba.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Gayathri. And I'm going to be, circling back with you to take you up on the offer of using this platform for really doing something in terms of the solutions for the problems that we elaborately discussed. Thank you very much for signaling that possibility. We'll circle back with you. Thank you very much. Then I would like to go to Dr. Anil. Are there any last 30 seconds comments that you would like to make, Dr. Sawhney?
Well, thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to share my views. I think I'll repeat, construction is a people business. Just because of employment, because of the way we utilize the built environment, everyone gets impacted. So it's too crucial a sector to take this semi-structured informal approach. I think all the industry proponents and stakeholders probably need to come together and ask these basic questions. How do we construct? Are we constructing the right way? How do we use tools such as digital technologies? Can we do a better job at that? How do we procure construction? So all these fundamental questions actually then drive back to skills and how do we train the workforce that we need. I think there are some fundamental shifts that are needed. We can't continue with business as usual. We really need to leapfrog into a much more technology-enabled approach, looking at other sectors such as shipbuilding, automotive, sectors that have really grown in the way the productivity has grown. And we largely, if you look at decade after decade, the productivity of the construction sector has remained stagnant. So we, again, business as usual can't continue. We need to borrow some best practices from other sectors and improve our sector.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sawhney. Could I go to Mr. Narayan for a very, very brief closing remark, please?
Absolutely. I think Dr. Gayathri mentioned all the right things. So I'm not going to repeat what she said and of course what Dr. Sawhney said. All I wanted to add to that is the ecosystem right now, if you go and individually ask everybody, they want to change, but the sector is not changing. So can we have a catalyst that will make the unorganized, unknown workers to be organized, known workers? That would mean maybe a salary level. That would mean they get into, the PF and other formal sector, by which automatically the person who's running the commercial venture is going to, if I'm going to pay so much, I better get productivity out of them. And then that virtuous cycle continues. So I just think there needs an intervention that could be by regulation, that could be otherwise, that's going to change and kick in a virtuous cycle.
Thank you very much, Narayan. I think those are very valuable comments. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to kind of summarize it with just a couple of bullet points. So, we are now really aware of the size of the problem and the complexity of the problem in the discussions today. The size, very simply put, we are having about 11,000 people joining the workforce every 24 hours. Be it Sunday, be it Monday or a Saturday. That's what is adding up to approximately 4 million people joining the workforce every year. We're also clear from all the discussion that a lot of work has happened and a lot of work is going on at the moment at multiple levels, at the government level, at the training industry level, at the education institution level, and at multiple levels, things are going on. And I'm sure that the industry is also quite grappling the issue and they're doing their own bit in terms of skilling these frontline workers. However, there is a large here and now issue. It is quite possible that listeners will go back today, not necessarily taking away 100%, doctor prescribed solution for the issue. But we cannot underestimate the various contributing points that have come up today in terms of where one could be looking for solutions for this problem. Certainly, industry to take the lead in terms of skilling the people whom they're employing. And we also felt that the supplier industry, which is already taking a lot of additional steps to participate in this, will be another big partner, apart from a lot more stepping up, a lot more result-oriented support from the other members of the ecosystem, including the government and training institutions. Certainly, today's discussions has brought out the dynamics of the industry and therefore the changing landscape of the skill level that's required going forward as a result of change in technologies, change in methods, change in materials, and as we go forward with the concept of construction 4.0 coming in, and so on. Fortunately for us, I think when we look at skill levels required for these changing technologies, which is the go forward life of ours, there seem to be a lot clearer solutions, clearer possibilities, clearer routes to actually skilling those people who are coming into workforce under the changed scenarios. However, we still have a long way to go to solve the here and now problem. What we have heard today are definite, clear pathways to going there, and a clear indication and idea of several bodies of work that has happened in taking us to the solution. I'm sure that we will need to have further conversations, and we may probably have more solutions on the table as we go forward. And I certainly look forward to a continued debate on this, and both in platforms like this, as well as on the BlueCircle, real estate sector conversations. I would really encourage people to be keeping the dialogue on. And for all you know, we may need another conversation like this not too far from today. I once again want to thank Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan, Dr. Anil Sawhney, and Mr. Narayanan for joining this webinar today. You have added absolutely immense value to my own personal knowledge and awareness. And I'm most certain that the audience who have listened to you today have been enriched by the points of debates and conversations. And there are many, many thousands of people who will be watching the discussions post the posting on the YouTube link, which we will share with you as you go forward. Thank you once again. Let me hand it back to Siddharth.
Thank you very much, ma'am and sirs. Such an insightful and engaging conversation, and an absolute privilege to hear you all, and very well moderated, Mr. Raghavan. Our leaders and I have been hooked till the end and have taken home several nuggets from today's conversation. Almost stayed up till about 2 hours today. I'm still receiving messages from our members as we speak, and I really wish that we had some more time. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for always staying till the end. Along with our weekly webinars and our digital publication, we're taking these discussions and conversations live on the exclusive community app for senior leaders across our 6 focus sectors, which are real estate, healthcare, e-mobility, energy, logistics, and aerospace and defense, soon adding many new features and 14 new sector communities to our portfolio. So whether you would like to engage with us on our platform, leaders are invited to join us. So thank you very much, sirs and ma'am, once again. We look forward to having more such discussions in the future, and please stay safe.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening. Good day, Dr. Sawhney. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.